Multi21 is more than Sebastian Vettel in his Red Bull villain era being a selfish jerk, and more than Mark Webber being a crybaby because he wasn't Red Bull's golden boy. It's time for our annual revisit because we're losing the ancient texts. The Euros 2013, think Jennifer Lawrence falling at the Oscars, and Game of Thrones Red Wedding. Seb had won the past 3 world championships. This was race 2 in Malaysia, and Seb was on pole while Mark was starting P5. Seb pit early for dry tires on lap 5, which handed Mark Webber the race lead. Mark was trying to save his tires, manage his pace, meanwhile Seb behind him was saying,
"Mark is too slow, get him out of the way."
After the final pit stops, Mark Webber was still in the lead, and Red Bull issued their command to Sebastian Vettel,
multi-map 2-1,
which meant that Mark Webber's number 2 car should finish the race ahead of Sebastian Vettel's number 1 car. Now, Mark Webber was told that we're going to turn on the engines, we're going to keep positions, and race to the end. Sebastian Vettel had other plans. He, being the cheeky, unhinged bastard that he was, decided to go rogue. He decided to attack. Now, his race engineer was telling him to be careful. Team principal Christian Horner was on the radio saying,
"This is silly, Seb, come on."
But Seb didn't listen.
Yep, that's good feedback.
Okay, Mark, he was told.
He decided to overtake Mark Webber. They fought a little bit, but in the end, he reigned supreme. Sebastian Vettel won the Malaysian Grand Prix.
Looked like you wanted it bad enough. Still, there'll be some explaining to do.
Mark Webber was not a happy man. Seb is in the cool-down room drinking water as if he's a parched man who had just walked through a desert. Mark Webber is saying,
"Multi-21, Seb." Yeah, multi-21.
And looking like an angry capybara, and Adrian Newey is standing there like a floating amoeba, not knowing what to do with himself. And on the podium, in the interviews, Mark Webber is saying,
"In the end, Seb made his own decisions today and we'll have protection as usual, and that's the way it goes."
In the aftermath, immediately, Seb is apologetic, okay? In the press conference, he is saying, "I made a big mistake today. We should have stayed in the positions that we were in." In the media, he is saying,
"For sure, it's not a victory that I'm very proud of because it should have been Mark's."
In the weeks between China and Malaysia, something changes. Seb, at this press conference at the Infinity headquarters with just him and a bunch of reporters, is saying things like, "You know what, I'm usually a guy that respects the team decisions and Mark didn't deserve it," but also saying that there's been more than one occasion in the past where Mark could have helped the team, aka him, and didn't. So there's a little bit of like, is this retribution? Is this revenge? Is this payback for something? And it's Ted Kravitz, I think, that asks him, is this payback for Brazil 2012? And he says, maybe indirectly so.
Bottom line is that I was racing, I was faster, I passed him, I won.
And Dietrich Mateschitz, team owner, is saying that there's going to be no more team orders at Red Bull. And when this is put to Mark Webber about this being retribution for Brazil 2012, he says,
I think you need to go a lot further back than that, mate.
When talking to Lee McKenzie, Seb is saying, you know what, I'm apologetic to the team for putting myself above them. I don't want to do that, but...
Not much more to say, really. I don't apologize for winning. I think that's why people employed me in the first place and why I'm here.
Basically, he's serving 10 out of 10 on the pole quotes, but he's also turning himself into the unwilling scion of being a bad teammate. The poster boy for it, if you will. The question is, why did he do this? I mean, my answer is that Seb is a winner through and through, and he saw an opportunity to win, which, unfair or not, he took, because the concept of coming second deliberately to lose deliberately is unnatural to him, which... That's the inner Seb fan of me talking, I know that. So let's go back. Is it payback for Brazil 2012? What was happening then? So Seb was fighting Fernando Alonso for a world championship, and Brazil was the final race of that quest. See, Fernando's teammate Felipe Massa was actively helping him. By choice or not, different question. And Mark Webber, despite being asked by Red Bull to be a team player, was not. Again, whether or not he's obliged to is a different question. See, Seb felt that Mark Webber was not just not helping him, but actively hurting his chances. He felt that he had been squeezed by Mark Webber into turn 1 at Interlagos, and that is one of the reasons he spun and was backwards and had to do this whole comeback drive from last place to P7 to win the championship, and he felt that that was unnecessary and that Mark had hurt him. But Mark said we have to go further back than that. So let's go a little further back than that. Silverstone 2011, where Mark Webber refuses team orders. See, Sebastian Vettel was in P1, Mark Webber P2, and they were told multi-map 1-2. Basically, Seb finishes before Mark. But Mark decides not to listen to that. He decides to try and pass Seb, except he was unable to execute in that moment. And after the race, Mark says, you know what, I saw an opportunity and I wanted to try and get the place. And Seb wasn't pressed either. He said, you know what, it depends on the race situation. At the same time that we're trying to fight for our team, you know, all that, we also want places for ourselves. So it wasn't that big of a deal, but maybe Mark has other things to be mad at. We can go back to Silverstone the year prior in 2010, and the whole thing was that Mark Webber's front wing was taken off and given to Sebastian Vettel, except Adrian Newey has corrected this in his book multiple times, saying that, you know what, they both had the new front wing assembly on their cars, and after FP1, they Mark Webber said he didn't like it. Now, Seb's had an issue after FP3, it got damaged, and so Adrian Newey asks Mark Webber and his race engineer, hey, are you going to use this for the rest of the weekend? They say no, so Newey has the new wing fitted to Sebastian Vettel's car, and Mark goes on to win this race with the old wing and says the famous words,
Fantastic, guys. Not bad for a number 2 driver. Cheers.
perhaps we have to go further back to Turkey 2010 when Mark is starting on pole, but eventually has to start saving fuel, and Seb catches up to him, I think about lap 40, and whether or not Mark didn't leave enough space or Seb was just being too much, doing too much, different question, but they end up crashing. Seb crashes into Mark, as that's how I see it, and Mark is very upset because Red Bull put this whole thing out as if it was neutral, as if they were both at fault, when as he feels that Sebastian Vettel was fully at fault. He writes a long letter to Dietrich Masch and says, maybe we can go back to 2007, their first ever on-track skirmish. It's raining cats and dogs at Fuji Speedway. They're behind a safety car. Lewis Hamilton, Mark Webber, then Sebastian Vettel. They're all in podium places. Mark Webber is vomiting into his helmet because of some questionable seafood he consumed. And out of nowhere, bam, Sebastian Vettel smashes into the back of him, and they're both out of the race. Mark Webber is saying, you know what, kids with no experience doing good until they fuck it all up, and Sebastian Vettel is crying his eyes out in the Toro Rosso garage. That one he felt genuinely bad about. In the time since Malaysia 2013, Mark Webber has said that the only thing he would do differently is that he would turn his engine back up and fight Seb properly for the race win. When asked in 2022 what he would change, Seb said that he wouldn't do anything differently. Obviously. But that's my thing. This was good racing. Even the pundits who said that they were upset with Seb for what he was doing to Mark, they couldn't deny that this was good racing. It was good for the fans. It was good for the spectators. And Mark Webber lamented that Red Bull didn't do enough to reprimand Sebastian Vettel. I mean, there were F1 drivers, former F1 drivers like John Watson, saying that Red Bull should be suspending Sebastian Vettel. But the thing is that he was a 3-time world champion. What were they realistically going to do? And that's the funny thing about Moto 21 is that there was really no point. This was a race 2. There was no point in Red Bull not letting them fight. They should have just let them fight. And there was no point in Sebastian Vettel denying team orders and overtaking him. It was race 2. There was a long season to go. He was going to go on to win 9 races in a row. Like, there was no need to do this. At the crux of the issue, Sebastian Vettel stole the number 1 driver title from right underneath Mark Webber's nose at Red Bull. And in his book, Aussie Grit, Mark says that, you know what, Seb was the better driver. I just wish I had gotten to race him at my prime. Multi 21 is a cultural revolution, and it happened before I started watching F1 properly, but I deplore team orders. I hate them. I understand their function. I understand why we use them. Their strategic value. I get it, but I don't like them. And I like when drivers refuse team orders in a robust fashion, because F1 is interesting that it's a team sport, right? You have to work together with your teammate to get the best results possible. That's part of it. But also your teammate is your biggest competition, arguably the most important person for you to beat. There's this juxtaposition, this catch-22. Your teammate is the only person who you have a level comparison with because you're operating an equal machinery, but you have to fight your instincts as a racing driver to beat them, because sometimes you have to work together. Sometimes you have to let them beat you.